Hello everybody and welcome back to the channel. As promised, I will be using this channel to talk about movies and TV again because that's what this place is for. However, before I get into that kind of stuff, I don't want to just start talking about movies again without acknowledging the fact that a lot of stuff is still happening around the world and in our own country. Since the last video came out, a lot has happened, which is now typical of 2020 at this point. And I know that it can be hard to keep taking in bad news and news about things that are happening all over the world, but I do think it's still our responsibility to stay informed of as much as we can. So you might want to do some reading about what's going on between India and China right now, between North Korea and South Korea, the horrible situation in Yemen right now. If you can find any way to sort of send what little help you can to these different places, I think that would be fantastic. And of course, the continuing crises in the United States, here in the Philippines. And since I put out that last video, Maria Ressa was convicted of cyber libel. And whether or not you like Rappler, which is besides the point at this point, the very fact that the courts convicted someone of a crime whose corresponding law hadn't even been passed at the time that crime was allegedly committed, that's a huge red flag for the rest of us. So please do continue defending press freedom, and always make sure to help out those around you and the sectors that are in need, especially in this time of the whole coronavirus thing. Again, in the description, I am leaving a link to helpfromhome.ph, which provides resources for how you can help vulnerable sectors at this time. If you have the time and if you have the resources, please do donate to causes that you believe in, causes that are close to you, and keep yourself and your family safe and healthy. Yes, please. With that said, let's talk about some movies. Now, the way this is going to proceed, because I've seen already a lot of stuff in 2020, I'm gonna break these things up into sort of little groups for the next few videos. So for this video, I want to talk about movies that came out in cinemas in 2020, but whose official release dates worldwide were in 2019. So these are late releases that we got in the Philippines, or Oscar contenders and whatnot. So the first movie I want to talk about is the first movie that I actually saw in cinemas in 2019, and that is Cats. Now I feel like my opinion in Cats is the most controversial film opinion that I currently have. First of all, I just want to preface it by saying that I think Cats is a bad movie no matter how you slice it. There's so much that is not working in its favor, and I could just run through the entire laundry list of things it does wrong, but this video would go on forever. But one of the main things that I think Cats gets wrong is that the screenwriters, Tom Hooper included, they don't take the opportunity to update the story or just, add anything to make the story a little better for the screen. Because I can see how this story works for the stage. Lots of musicals are essentially just song cycles or reviews, and they don't necessarily need a story to really carry the music. Here, because the film comes off like a narrative feature, it needs a stronger story. But in its current form, you don't care about any of the characters, and that's a problem for this movie in particular because so much of the plot that's there depends on the idea that these cats are competing to be sort of chosen to ascend to the next level of the reality or whatever. So we need to know them as characters. However, the script doesn't have any character moments to speak of. A lot of people have complained about the CGI in this movie, which is something that I actually disagree with. I don't really have a problem with the visual effects here. People have complained about the performances, and I sort of half agree with that because I do think there are good performances in the movie. However, there are also some really atrocious performances here, and most of them are near the beginning. James Corden, Rebel Wilson, Jason Derulo, just really not good. However, the thing that I think that Cats gets wrong the most is something that a lot of people don't really talk about, which is the fact that Tom Hooper's direction sucks. The thing with Cats is that from the very get-go, we know that it's set in a fantastical world. It's about a community of cats. It's sort of a very big picture kind of thing. We need to see how this whole world sort of operates. And I can see how that works on stage because you can see the Jellicles on stage all at the same time. You have a macro view of this community. However, in this movie, Tom Hooper insists on doing his stupid Les Mis close-ups. Like he keeps trying to prove to us that his actors are singing, so the community aspect is gone. The world of it never really gets the exposure that it needs. It's badly edited, it's badly shot, and every single attempt at humor that Tom Hooper tries is just, it falls flat on its face. With all that said, I really, really enjoyed watching this movie. And I don't even mean that in like an ironic way or that like I was hate watching it or whatever. Like I genuinely think it's a fun movie. And I think a lot of that will depend on how much you accept the music. Because Andrew Lloyd Webber's score for this musical is really kind of strange. The score really sort of shape-shifts between every song. And some people will really not like that. But I think if you can get on its wavelength and enjoy the quirkiness of the score, you'll enjoy it. If you're able to ride along with its brand of weirdness, it's actually pretty easy to get used to. So yeah, like if you've never seen Cats because you've just heard all the terrible things about it, I actually think that there's a chance you might enjoy it if you're into like weird things. So I don't know, give it a shot. Next up, let's talk about Jojo Rabbit, which is a slightly less controversial movie that came out last year. I really enjoy Jojo Rabbit. I think that I'm going to be a fan of Taika Waititi's style of comedy forever because I just like the fact that it's clear that he likes making movies and that he just does what he wants, and most of it is really, really funny. However, the thing that impressed me more in Jojo Rabbit is the fact that Taika was able to show like a dramatic side to his storytelling that we had never really seen before, at least that I hadn't seen before. The drama in this movie is surprisingly affecting. It mixes pretty well with the comedy for the most part. And yeah, like I look forward to seeing like more dramatic stuff that Taika might want to do in the future. And the cast is fantastic. Roman Griffin Davis, who plays Jojo, I don't know how he's so good so young, but he's good at the drama, he's good at the comedy, and he maintains a pretty good accent throughout the movie. Scarlett Johansson this is like one of the best roles she's had in a while because she's actually allowed to have fun for once. Sam Rockwell is great. Alfie Allen is really, really funny. And Thomasin McKenzie, who plays the little Jewish girl who's hiding in Jojo's house, like is fantastic as always. However, I do not love Jojo Rabbit. I do have issues with it that I think take away from the overall quality of the movie. For one, I think that there are some comedic things about it that feel very intrusive to the drama. Mostly the whole Taika Waititi as Hitler thing. It's not that I'm like offended, why would I be offended by that? But it's the fact that I feel like he doesn't really do anything with that running gag. It's sort of the same shtick over and over again, and his Hitler character shows up more often than I think is necessary, and he ends up sort of robbing some of the more dramatic scenes of their weight. However, the bigger problem I have with Jojo Rabbit is that I don't think the movie fully allows Jojo to really explore how he feels about like all the messed up things happening in his country. Like, of course it's there, but I feel like children would have like a more complex response to war and trauma and whatnot. So I just felt like the film kind of fell flat there in its representation of children and how complex their feelings can be. And I also don't buy the ending as much as the film wants you to feel a certain way in the ending. I just felt like it didn't earn it. But don't get me wrong, I still think it's a good movie. I still look forward to everything Taika does. Next up, we have Richard Jewell, directed by Clint Eastwood, which was nominated for exactly 1 Oscar for Best Supporting Actress for Kathy Bates. Just really quickly, I guess, like most of Clint Eastwood's recent movies, this one was just, it was fine, it was okay, it was functional. It doesn't really delve too deep into the sort of subject matter it has or to Richard Jewell's psychology. It's just sort of there, and the main conflict is resolved super easily, and which again is not earned at all. And it just sort of, it's functional, but it's a little forgettable. The story is worth telling because it's about this security guard who is sort of villainized by the media because he's, you know, not necessarily the most well-educated person. He's pretty naive, and he's just like this working class dude. And it's really, really interesting to see this character sort of become disillusioned with law enforcement and whatnot. And much of that is thanks to Paul Walter Hauser, who is incredible in this movie. I understand that 2019 was a really tough year in terms of like the best actor race. And I wish that Paul Walter Hauser had a better shot of getting in the 5 nominees for the Oscar because he's very, very good in this movie, and it's great to see someone who isn't necessarily like the leading man type to get a role this meaty and this thick. Next up, we have the movie that a lot of people thought was going to win Best Picture this year, and that is 1917, directed by Sam Mendes. Now, to get this out of the way first, not everything about the story works, especially if you've seen the movie. The scene with the barn, which is a very pivotal scene in the movie, is just completely unbelievable. Like, when it happens, it's like, why are the characters acting this way? It's just really strange. Anyway, but that doesn't necessarily bother me so much, because to me, this is one of those movies that is more about like the atmosphere than the story, and to me that's okay. In fact, I'm a very, very big fan of how Sam Mendes used all his long shots to create a more sort of introspective tone. I was expecting him to use the long shots to create like technically brilliant action set pieces or whatever, but there's actually not that much action in this movie, which I really was surprised by. There's a quietness to 1917 that I really enjoy. It feels more like a reflection on how futile war is and whatnot, and I really appreciated that about it. But of course, technically speaking, it's still insane. Roger Deakins is insane. I don't know how he comes up with like ideas how to light certain scenes, but he's just a madman. Like, his cinematography is worth the price of admission alone. However, the person that I was most impressed by in this movie, surprisingly, was George Mackay, because I didn't know that this was like an acting movie. And there are a lot of guest stars from the UK who pop up in the trenches and whatnot, and they're all really good, but George Mackay really caught me off guard. You learn everything you need to know about this war just from him and his expressions as he's running through these landscapes. It's a really great performance in a movie that I think gets praised only for its technical aspects. Next up, we have a movie that came out in cinemas here in the Philippines in 2020, but wasn't actually nominated for anything at the Oscars. I'm not really sure why we got it, but anyway, it's Ophelia, directed by Claire McCarthy. This is the kind of movie that, like, just from its premise alone, like, I would absolutely eat up, because it's a retelling of Hamlet sort of from Ophelia's point of view. And as someone who really likes Hamlet and who recognizes that the character of Ophelia isn't really treated super well, I was very interested going into this. Unfortunately, the movie really doesn't do anything with the shift in point of view. It really does just sort of retell Hamlet without necessarily giving Ophelia more agency. And when she finally does get a little more agency, like toward like the second half of the movie, it comes in a very forced way. So story-wise, it is disappointing, even if I really like the premise, and I wish more people would do this sort of revisionism of classic literature and whatnot. However, the rest of the movie is well made. I think the production design is completely lavish, and it's like the reason to see the movie. The performances are very good. Daisy Ridley continues to spread her wings beyond Star Wars, thank God. George Mackay is also in this movie, and he's very good. Tom Felton has a very small role here, but it's, again, great to see him doing other stuff. So yeah, like, this is a movie that isn't really on people's radar, but if you're vaguely interested, maybe it's worth checking out. Next up, we have Bombshell, which won makeup and hairstyling at this year's Oscars and was nominated for a bunch of other stuff. My thoughts on Bombshell are pretty much the same thoughts I have about other movies from the Adam McKay school of docudrama filmmaking. You know, like lots of high energy quick cuts and handheld cameras and like direct addresses to the camera and stuff like that. In other words, I don't really like that kind of stuff, and I don't think that Bombshell benefited from this style of filmmaking. I think all these flourishes only got in the way of the story it was trying to tell, the message it was trying to get across. But even without these directorial touches, I felt that Bombshell didn't really do enough to unpack the protagonist's sort of complicity in this culture invading Fox News. Post-Trump's election, a lot of sexual abusers were emboldened to continue on doing what they do. And Fox News does push that narrative, arguably, more so than a lot of other news networks in America. So it would have been really interesting to see that angle, but they really just don't go there. However, even without that angle, I do think that the story that they have here is pretty good. It's interesting to see the office politics within Fox News and how complex all that can be. The performances are all very, very good, but especially from Margot Robbie, who is, again, the best part of the movie that she's in. She's the only character, she's playing the only character here who isn't really based on a real person, but she manages to be the most memorable part. Next up we have UnTrue, which is a movie that actually premiered here in the Philippines last year because it was either the opening film or the closing film of one of the film festivals. I didn't get to see it because that was an invite-only screening, but it received like a smaller release early this year. I really, really wanted to like this because I heard lots of good things. The reviews on Letterboxd are good. But yeah, God. Okay, what I will give this movie is that Christine Reyes is very, very good. She's good in everything that I've seen her in, and here she gets a very difficult, like, almost like self-contradictory role. She gets to play different sides to her character very, very well, and she's memorable and she's great. Yeah, but the rest of this movie, I'm just pretty tired of like these psychological thrillers that are so convinced of their own edginess. And the edginess sort of takes place of good storytelling. And to me, that's not an excuse. Like, you can't just have your movie be really violent and really, really confusing and expect people to think that that's creative, because it's not. I think being clear and being honest with your storytelling is much harder to do even than just being really confusing. You can tell that this movie is trying to get us to be like all impressed with how we don't know which version of the truth to trust, because both of them are supposed to seem plausible, and you know, we don't know which of these characters is actually good. However, the problem is, like, each version of the truth in this movie is completely implausible and ridiculous and almost unintentionally funny. Also, it's yet another psychological thriller that uses mental illness and domestic violence as just like plot points, and they don't actually explore these things. They don't actually say anything helpful about these things. And so UnTrue just becomes a really nasty watch. Like, I just didn't enjoy the experience at all. Whenever any twists came up, they were just so laughable and ridiculous. And I don't mean that this movie is hard to watch in the same way that like Parasite is hard to watch, you know, because Parasite says something honest and true that a lot of people don't want to really think about in their normal lives, but they have to. Whereas UnTrue, like, coincidentally because of its title, says something very dishonest and doesn't really contribute to any discussion anywhere. I really didn't like it. So, however, let's end on a high note and let's talk about one of my favorite movies from 2019, and that is Little Women, directed and written by Greta Gerwig. There's so much to love about this movie that I don't even know where to begin. What I will say is that the first time I watched this, like, I had such a visceral, emotional reaction to everything that happened, and like, I hadn't had that experience watching a movie in so long, especially like a sort of a rom-com type film. Like, whenever anything huge happened to any of these characters, I was like slapping my knee and like shouting at the screen. It was just such a... I cared about these characters so much by the end of this movie that whenever anything happened to them, I felt like it was happening to me or to friends of mine. First of all, if there's anyone out there watching this who has not seen Little Women yet and isn't very interested because they think it's just like a quote-unquote chick flick, or that it's like a stuffy period drama, I promise you that it is neither of those things. The storytelling in this is so strong. It's such a great directorial piece by Greta Gerwig. You can learn so much like filmmaking technique from it. There's just something so warm and energetic about Greta Gerwig's direction. She takes this text, which is like 150 years old, and she injects it with this sort of modern energy, but she doesn't make it like cheesy modern. It's not like they're throwing around millennial slang. Every single part of this movie works. The score is incredible, and the editing is some of the best non-linear storytelling that I've ever seen. Because, you know, that's the big thing that Greta Gerwig changed about the story, is that she took a linear novel and then she switched up the scenes and the sequencing of scenes. But what the editing achieves is that it strings together some scenes from the past with some scenes in the present, and the editing and Greta Gerwig, they find new sort of emotional contact points between these two different scenes. So when you're watching things unfold, the editing adds to the emotional weight of the scenes, because you can sort of read them in the context of what's going to happen next or what happened before. It's really just smart storytelling that I feel like other filmmakers might use as a gimmick, but here it comes off as completely essential. Like, I can't imagine Little Women now without this sort of sequencing. And of course, the performances are out of this world. The whole ensemble is putting in their A game. The second time I saw Little Women, the actor who really stood out to me even more was Eliza Scanlon, who plays Beth, who doesn't get as much screen time as her other sisters, but she exudes this sort of quiet courage about her that just makes her so endearing and so likable. I think if these girls were like my friends in real life, I would be friends with Beth the most. And then you have Florence Pugh, who had like a huge year in 2019, and her work in Little Women is her best work. She's hilarious in the younger scenes, but in the older scenes she has like this elegance about her that feels extremely earned. And then Timothée Chalamet and Saoirse Ronan, of course, are like the on-screen power couple to end all on-screen power couples. There's something about the way they play these youthful characters where, you know, they're not afraid to let these characters appear dumb and foolish, but their emotions still feel completely authentic. Like whenever anything happens that sort of breaks their hearts, you feel that pain with them. You feel the entire world sort of crumbling around them, and it doesn't feel petty. And of course you have Greta Gerwig's screenplay, which I think absolutely should have won the Oscar this year. It's so difficult to take a text this old and adapt it into like a screenplay that's so accessible and so fresh. That still manages to say really wise things about like all the classic themes, you know, love and family and independence and whatnot. And these themes hit harder because the characters are so well-rounded and they're so complete. The relationships are so clear with each other, so again, when anything happens to them, it feels like it's happening to you as well. But the thing that I really loved about Little Women more than anything else, in my opinion, is the special attention that Greta Gerwig takes to Jo's life as a writer. I love any sort of fiction that represents writers well and like understands sort of the process that writers get into. And I thought the way she portrayed Jo in this movie as someone whose writing reflects her thoughts about her family, about herself, about her independence as a woman, but also her yearning to be loved, I thought that was brilliant. Like, it's just, like, I don't know how you even begin to write a character like that, but she did it. So again, if you have not seen Little Women yet for any reason, please do watch it. I feel like, especially in a time now of like constant anxiety, Little Women is such a tonic. Like, it's such a fun, emotional watch that will leave you feeling sort of more emboldened and empowered. Whether or not you relate to these characters, whether or not you have sisters, I think it's good for everybody. Alright, so those were my thoughts on this first batch of movies slash TV shows that I'm going to be doing for the next couple of weeks, hopefully. But yeah, thank you guys again for tuning in. Thank you for watching. If you have anything to say, please leave me a comment down below. And again, as always, please stay safe, stay healthy, and let's have a conversation.